Welcome to The Grant, the EU funding podcast. The Grant. My name is Niels Tudor Winter, and I am the creator, editor, and host of The Grant. The Grant is an independent, non-commercial podcast initiative with the ambition to dig into all corners of the EU R&D funding system on topics of interest for the full EU R&D funding community. For many years, there has been an imbalance between all the funding for projects and efforts carried out in these projects versus the actual utilization of the project results after the project's end. The EU Commission has over the years tried to deal with this fundamental and critical imbalance in the whole funding-based system. I was reminded of this when I saw a post on LinkedIn by Catherine Collins, freelance science journalist writing for, among several, Horizon Magazine, Science Business, Science Calling, and EU Observer. The post was pushing an article she had written on a new concept that the EU Commission has initiated to utilize results from funded projects. A hackathon where anyone with an interest and capacity to work with the data were invited to make their bid on how to utilize data from former concrete EU projects. I therefore invited Catherine into the virtual podcast studio for a talk about her article, about the hackathon concept, and about this paradox that has been prevailing for decades in the EU funding system. Lots of funding, but many results never being used. But also on all the things that the EU Commission has actively done to overcome this paradox. Please enjoy. The Grant. Welcome to The Grant, the EU funding podcast. If you're a regular, you will probably know or realize that I start to have quite diverse stuff. It's deliberate. And I'm going to be totally transparent. My podcast strategy is it's not flawed. I have a baseline for my strategy. But I also pick things up on my network and LinkedIn and so on. This is why sometimes I have subjects that you say, ooh, where does that come from? And the reason why I'm saying this is because this is one of the issues that we're having here today. This is the subject of today, and this is the reason why I'm recording this today, is because my guest today was having a post, making a post on LinkedIn that I noticed. And I picked it up as my modus operandi, and she agreed. And you don't talk about another person in third person when they're in the same room, even if it's a virtual room. So, Catherine, welcome.
Hi, Niels. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you in, Catherine. Without further ado, share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a science journalist working in Brussels. I mainly cover EU research and policy, and I've been here since 2014. I do write freelance. Some of the publications that I write for that are more related to EU research would be Science Business. Previously, I also worked for Horizon Magazine as well, which is the European Commission's Research and Innovation magazine. And then I'm also covered in some other publications, New Scientist, the EU Observer once, and some of the other kind of, research policy type of trade magazines. Yeah, I also worked as communications manager for Meta Group for a couple of years, and you mentioned them earlier during our chat, so I thought I'd just throw that in here as well.
Sure, get back to that.
Yeah.
Freelancer, how long have you been a freelance journalist?
Ooh, freelance. God, now. I've kind of been on and off between freelance and employee, but I think I've been freelance now since just before the pandemic. Yeah.
Oh, nice. I guess. That's big. Well, the pandemic was not nice.
No, definitely not.
But I guess because doing that kind of work.
Yeah. It
Probably
was
have been okay, no?
I mean, initially it was like, really interesting because, suddenly there was a huge interest in science journalism. Of course, normally science journalism is kind of one of those topics
Massive.
that, main newsrooms kind of leave to the end. But suddenly we had a huge amount of interest, and that was pretty cool. But I mean, as the pandemic wore on, it got quite depressing to cover it sometimes. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it was like just general mood, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But during that time, I mean, because my career is a little bit varied, I mean, I was also working in communications for another organization a lot. So I wasn't, I covered bits of the pandemic probably in 2020, but not so much in 2021. So yeah, it was okay for me. But I know for other journalists, it was kind of rough to keep covering COVID over and over again.
All right. Thanks for thanks for that. That's interesting. So what we're going to just before we move into the topic, have you had a specific focus in your journalism or in your writings on EU R&D funding?
Yes, yes, definitely. Yeah, I've kind of always covered EU research, DG R&D, Horizon Europe, FP7, all of those. That's kind of been the main theme, really, of most of my career.
Okay, but I find now it's not this podcast is not about science journalism and horizon journalism, but I find it very interesting that you can actually make a living out of that because I always thought that this is something that very few people find interesting and also
hmm
difficult to develop a journalism around or a career around.
Yeah, I mean, I have to tell you, like, it's very niche. I mean, I don't think there's a huge amount of people doing journalism in this field, but yeah, there's definitely a market for EU research policy journalism. I mean, the grants are so huge, right? And there are a lot of angles, whether you're covering more on the science side or whether you're covering more on the policy side. Um, so yeah, there is huge scope, but I totally understand. I mean, I came to Brussels and I kind of found this pool and jumped into it, but I didn't know it existed before I came here, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, but no, but it I like it. You know what? I'm just browsing here. Sorry for your listeners to for me to walk a little bit around the subject, but I just find it very interesting. I have actually seems like ages ago, but episode number 15. So one of my first interviews was the title of the episode was called "Break On Through to the Other Side." So it was about communicating on Horizon Europe. That was the topic, and it was about exactly this, Catherine, about like sharing how difficult it is to share with the other side, the real world, so to say, what happens in
hmm
this weird parallel world of EU R&D funding, the lingo, the discourse, like all these things. It's being someone who facilitates or interprets these things for the other side to understand it and engage and be, thrilled about the magnificent things that are happening. It's very difficult.
hmm
Yeah,
Yeah, but it's totally true. It's like it's a little zone. It really is a bubble,
it
here.
is. It is. Nah. Let's move into to the topic of the day. So today we're going to talk about project impact, but it's not. We will not talk about project impact narrowly. We will zoom a little bit out and look at what happens when projects in general finishes and what happened with those results and the commission's uh, what it does about this. And maybe you can explain yourself the motivation why I reached out to you because it's your article.
Mhm. Sure. So you reached out to me based on an article that I wrote for Science Business, which was on hackathons. And so, the European Commission does organize a certain number of hackathons through various different bodies that are associated with it. And this is a way that the European Commission can use to either to get projects to, find uses for their data or where they have big databases already, like eMudNet was the one that I covered, I think, more than any other in the article that I wrote about. So this is the European Marine Observation Data Network.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so they had just organized this big hackathon. And the idea was the participants would have to find innovative ways to use their data, right?
Yeah.
So they have these huge databases that researchers contribute to, and they were getting innovators to come up with ways to use that data for societal good. I think they had 6 challenges from memory. Um, and so one of them was like protecting biodiversity. I can't remember the other ones, but they were all based around different marine themes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The reason why I reacted to this is because I know from my 15 years of experience working with EU R&D funding that it has always been, I call it the eternal problem. It's always been a problem with projects being funded. They do a magnificent work, and then they come out on the other side, and then nothing happens. It dies, or
Hmm.
it's not utilized. It's not commercialized. It's not the result are not being used. This is something. So when I saw this, I thought this is good. It's good if the commission starts to think new ways. But then I reminded myself there are other things that they've actually been doing over years. And this is why I thought we should have a talk about this, because we will have a talk about what they have actually done, because they've done a lot, right, over the
Hmm.
years, and how they try to move things, and what this whole thing is. Talk about the issue for the listeners to get an idea of how difficult it actually is for the funding administrators to get like something out of the funding that they like return on investment, so to say.
Hmm.
No,
Hmm.
I put here in my rundown that we should have a talk about the history of the framework programs and how focus becomes stronger and stronger on impact from the commission.
Hmm.
Um, so, to my knowledge, back in the early framework programs, there was not a lot of focus on these things. Impact.
Hmm.
There was an assumption that it would come by itself. Yeah,
Hmm.
that you would fund something, and then of course the results would be used. Why would they not? They weren't. And of course we are generalizing here, because many people would probably come back angry in my inbox saying, yes, we have lots of results that have been used. That's not the point. I know that there are lots of projects where things have been moving on afterwards, and you are making tons of money, or lots of like going into markets, whatever. But that's not the point here. The point is that there are an even larger amount of projects where nothing has come out of it, or it just died.
Hmm.
And that is sort of the commission started to realizing this probably in the zero sometime. When I started working with this in 2008, it was a discussion that started a little bit, but I don't know. Do you remember a little bit more detail, maybe, or do you?
Yeah, I mean, well, no, in 2008 I was still in university, so
No.
I wasn't so involved in that. But when I came to Brussels, it was just around it was Horizon 2020 was the framework program that was in place.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there was like this new focus, which was on innovation and was on impact. And it might have come up vaguely in FP7, but I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that Horizon 2020 was the first time this exploitation plan was a feature of the grants.
Yeah.
Mm.
was yeah. It was FP7 was they started to, in the call texts, they started to put more attention to the impact part. So,
Mhm.
but it was not, like this just from Horizon 20 from FP7 to Horizon 2020, there was clearly a shift,
Hmm.
because they probably realized that something had to be done.
Mm.
It's the thing is, and I can share this with the listeners. And this is why we are paddling a little bit here in the beginning, because it's very difficult to find data and information about this problem on the internet. It's I did my desktop research, and the truth is that I could not identify facts, texts, or data on this. But what I know from my 15 years of experience that it has been an issue that has been debated from the Commission side, and it's been in the program committees. I've been sitting in the program committee myself. I've been an NCP myself back in around from 8 to 10. It was an issue. It was something that was being debated, that it was the importance of all these projects that do not move on. We need to change that shift. So it was a lingo the Commission would have towards the civil servants from the countries, from the member states, in the fora where you would discuss these things and would take a decision about things. So they would suggest measures in the work program on ramming up the focus on impact. And I think the proof of it, even though it's not been able for me to dig anything out, is that the Commission keeps lifting the bar of what you need to do with your project when you come out on the other side. But we will get back to that later. I think as a fly-in, it's as what do you say, flawed as it might be, not really concrete. It should be enough to move on with having a talk about the turn problem.
Hmm. Hmm.
So this issue with projects, and then when the funding stops, it's they don't move any further. So what I have put here, sort of in my brainstorm on this, is bullets like a lack of incentive to continue for own funds, or lack of definition on which terms it could continue. Then you have what I call projectism, or funding hunters that just they run after the funding, and when it stops, then they move on to the next funding.
Mm.
And then the lack of push from funding administrators to lock the funding to push project activities. These elements, what I'm trying to move into, that we need to have a talk about why this is so.
Mm. Well, I think when you talk about like why it's so, like why researchers were going, let's say, from one funding scheme to another, I think like they really didn't have incentive not to. I mean, if you look at academia, and I know that, in the Horizon grants, of course, there are more actors than just academia. But if you look at someone who wants to be an academic researcher, they're sort of living off grants.
Yeah.
They go from one grant to the next. They're like in the final years of their research, they're already doing the applications for the next grant. And so I think that kind of mentality was, and to some extent still is, although I think there are improvements there. But I do think that was like the mentality of, you applied for one research grant and then you apply for the next one, and the results might lead on to your next project, or they might be just, sidelined because something more interesting came up or something more interesting was funded.
That's the academic world.
Yeah.
But what you also have with the academic world is that you have people where they have built careers on digging into one issue. Or like they are generalizing again, but it's you have a researcher that has stuck into something that he or she thinks that this is this is what I need to. This is my academic interest. This is where I need to go, and then because of they're always lacking funds in the public universe, public research, then they always run after the funding to get it to continue working with that they burn for, that their heart is beating for. Um,
Hmm.
but that doesn't necessarily mean, so they will run after funding, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there will come something out of it, so to say, in the real world.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the problem that the commission had, right? Because, of course, people are paying a lot of taxes, and a lot of those taxes are going into research. And,
Exactly.
the commission wants to demonstrate that what it's funding has a real impact on people's lives and citizens' lives.
Yeah.
So I think that's when they came into it. And there was this term that was coined, I think in the 2000s actually, this European paradox, right? So that in Europe we have a long tradition of research, and that tradition is very strong, but that research wasn't translated into innovation and impact.
Mhm.
Um, and this was something that the commission were talking about when they were trying to, I suppose, tackle this problem. Because of course we know that if you have like knowledge intensive companies, that this can like stimulate the economy, that these can bring jobs, and that this can also, you know, maybe build a unicorn. Who knows?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Um, but yeah, but one thing I think about impact as well is that it's very easy for people to think about impact as just commercialization, but it's a lot more than that. It's not just about like building a company, it's also about like, can you, you know, give some can you develop a document that is able to inform policy? Like,
Hmm.
can you
Yeah,
talk to
yeah.
policymakers? Do you do workshops? Do you create an NGO? Um, you know, it's not just about like building a company, but I also think that there's a kind of a misconception in the world of, researchers and other organizations that are doing proposals, that
Yeah.
they think, how can I do an exploitation plan? Because let's say I'm an environmental researcher and I want to study, I don't know, frogs.
Yeah.
And I'm doing my proposal and I'm like, but I can't create a company out of this. So what's the exploitation? Like, how do I create something of value at the end?
Yeah. I think
Um,
we have to. So this is, of course, a complex issue to sort of why does what's the impact, because we have researchers, we have the industry, we have
yeah,
SMEs, we have entrepreneurs, you have NGOs, you have coordination and support action, things with knowledge sharing. And I think also then you go also education, Erasmus, also live projects, but that's
hmm,
so there are many different like it's the whole world, so to say, filled into funding world, where you have different kind of things coming out. But I think if we look at the research, you have certain research areas, basic research, right, where you cannot talk about commercializing or
hmm,
having, right, connecting with industry. But then you have research areas where there is, what to say, biotechnology, or
hmm,
I don't know, sensor technology, where things that where it starts to move into where they collaborate with industry or SMEs and so on. And then you have the industry, so industry focused projects. That's of course things
hmm.
that fall there. Then the money was, they shouldn't probably have done it if the company doesn't even want to pick it up themselves. Like if you look at EIC projects or SME projects, or things where you have a group of companies working together with research, and if they come out on the other side and they don't want to pick up their own, yeah, then there's an issue there, right? Then they should maybe not have received the funding in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I think there are some instances, and like maybe the joint undertakings are an example of this, where there are certain projects that maybe the European Commission would like industry specifically to do, such as, for example, like funding areas that might not be so profitable for the pharma industry, but that we need,
Mm.
or funding areas like green aviation,
Yeah.
because because such areas might be very R&I heavy for the industry,
Mm.
but have obvious benefits for society. So I think that's where you can have a lot of value from the industry partnerships. But in the context of other grants, yeah, I mean, if you're developing something for commercial that has commercial purpose, and then at the end the industry don't want it, yeah, there can be a, a bit of an issue there.
Yeah, because now we're talking about what are why does things stop, right? Or what's the lack of incentive to continue? And now I stopped a little bit here because moving into the cocktail party projects, as I call them, knowledge sharing,
Okay.
a huge amount of euros, thousands and thousands, maybe millions of euros have been, might be pushing it saying pissed away, but it's been money that has been, there's been thrown so much money after knowledge sharing that is not justified. It's well known within the group of stakeholders that follow these kind of funding with knowledge sharing that it's one of the travel projects. Huh? It's one where we get a trip once in a while, and nothing really comes out of it. Unfortunately, Interreg, they probably have adjusted it a little bit as far as I know, but I know in the past Interreg was a place where many organizations went in and made these kind of activities that they could just continue for project after project, just redefining a little bit and adjust a little bit. We need to continue the work, but where if you look at what happened in the real world. Yeah, what happened in the... no citizen would say, I can really see that you collaborated with Sweden or with Germany. It's fantastic what just pushing paper across desks and pushing money and then funding some chairs and getting a trip once in a while. This is probably something that can make any clerk in the European Commission furious thinking about.
Yeah.
They exist. And these things, obviously, there's no incentive to, all the amounts of policy recommendations within all kinds of areas. Who follows these things that they are? Do you get you understand these kind of, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah, I understand the point.
Have you ever heard any politician just in the area you live in saying, look, we have followed the policy recommendations from project on environmental standardizations from this and this EU project. We followed the policy recommendations, so now we are implementing these things based on this. We have agreed in the community council that this should be done. And no.
Mm-mm.
I've never heard it in Denmark.
I've never personally heard it. It's true I'm living in Brussels right now, though, so not in Ireland.
It's also an EU country. They could also communicate about it if it...
I'm less good at following the Belgian news, but yeah, I know what you mean.
No, but and probably there will be people out there listening to this being angry. My listeners are growing, so I would probably also have segments listening to this. That's not true. We make results. We have done wonderful projects. Again, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about all the projects that didn't, because there are lots. And that is just, you want to get away from that. It's.
But I suppose, how do you? Because there's always going to be a certain amount of research projects that, let's say, maybe don't have great results or didn't go well. And in a way, that's kind of the risk that you take on as a funder when you fund research and innovation, because research could go well or research could go badly.
So you can. So this is the point with research funding, that's an innovation funding, that you fund things that everybody could, in partners and the committee, okay, this is a good idea. This needs to be looked at because it has a huge potential to come on the other side. But then the project shows the work they do in the project shows that it's not. Yeah, that's the part of it. That's part of research and innovation funding, right? If we look a little bit now, we talked a little bit about the lack of incentive to continue for own funds. Then you have this. This lack of definition on which terms things could continue after funding. Yeah, so this, I guess this is a problem that has been over the years, that you have not, there's not been enough push from the commission to the project partners, to the consortia, to say, look, you need to define what's happening afterwards. You need to force the group to reflect on it, what's going to happen. Because I can share with you, when I've been sitting and writing proposals or developing proposals myself, you don't think of this. Yeah, you focus on the project design and to develop the work packages and the work descriptions and how that project will work out. And so this is it's been an annoyance to when sitting and having to find out how to continue. And often it has been an alibi, the text that has been writing about this, we have to have something about what's happening afterwards. And then you take some like standard text from another proposal, and you adjust a little bit on that the project partners will, as part of the work, look into how it can continue afterwards. But there's no hatch, right? There's nothing to say, wait a minute, if you don't do this, then but we will get back to that, because that's one of the things that the commission has focused on. But this is one of the things, definitely, that has been an issue, that you have not been forced to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. But do you think maybe that there's not that you're not forced to deal with it also because how do you continue something also without funding? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. The problem, of course, with research and innovation projects is that normally you have come out with a result in the end. If we just say it's a technology project, right? That you will come out, and then there's something that the companies can take, should take with them into the real world. But you have many partners, because the commission has sort of stepped up over the years the importance of more holistic projects. So the strategic call texts includes social areas or community areas, things where you have to connect with partners that you would not normally do if you would do it as a private just a commercial research project, right? Since Horizon 2020, at least, I don't remember, it's probably also in FP7, you had to make these tables with results that will come out of it, and then who will utilize it and how. But they were just simple tables where you sort of just listed what they would take with them, and then you would adjust. That would be mirrored up against the impact section, where it would be part of a much longer text with other elements. And it's so easy to just let them go, as it used to be. You had to write them, or you had to be there. Again, raised focus on, we'll get back to that in a second, how the commission has tried to work with it. But when the funding is ended, a lot of the partners will say that we don't have the funding to continue with that. Yeah. So again, you're back to the problem of the funding. It's the funding that defines if you can continue. And many people, just this Monday, I will release an episode on AI, Chat GPT, which will have been released when this episode is rolling. It would be episode number 54 for listeners to go back to listen to that. And there we actually touched upon, but what is it that we actually get today? What are the projects that are being generated that we have today, and the project, the proposals. And Gareth McNaughton, from his Director of Innovation in EIT Urban Mobility, he said, look, it's much better what I see when I see the text that come from ChatGPT, where I see this test. It's much more structured than I've seen in the proposals we read here in EIT Urban Mobility for our calls. It's much better. Why do I need to like, why would I need to read all these things that are when that has been worked on intensively for a long time, when a virtual, like artificial intelligence can do it much more structured.
Mm. Oh God.
And the point is that you will have a much more, that you have a lot of projects that where nothing comes out of it in the end. That's been funded a lot where nothing comes out in the end. It just dies because people are, as one of the other guests in the panel said, people become junkies. Like researchers become junkies, and some parts of the research, industry side of it also become junkies of the funding.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that they follow instead of focusing on what they do and focus on that instead. And it's just that, and when the funding stops, then the thing stops. No, that's not the way it's supposed to be. How? Because that's the core question of the whole funding system for this. That's to make everything better. Mm-hmm. In the real world. How do we develop better technologies to use on every day? How do we develop better innovation process for our SMEs, for our industries? How do we develop better ways of doing things in the health sector? How do we develop our society, the real world? It's not supposed to be a system that keeps people sitting at their desks and doing things that they will only want to do if they get funding.
Yeah.
From this point of view, that's probably the eternal problem, right? Because that's what funding does, especially when you have so much money as the Commission has. There's a lot of money. I think I think we should move a little bit on to which tools the EU Commission has actually tried to use, because we want to. The motivation for all this was your article on the hackathon, and that's what I would like to get down and talk to what they, because I know. This is not tampering. This is not knocking the Commission's head in this episode. It's actually it's a market failure that's difficult for them to handle, because they, in this respect, many people are often angry about the way the Commission does things with the funding schemes. But from, I would say, my impression of the Commission and how they work is that this they have always taken seriously. They always try to deal with the market failure, so to say, the funding market failure. That this fund, the fact they give funding creates a failure that people don't want to do things unless they get funding. But you want to fund things, you need funding to move over the original market failure that they cannot, because nobody wants to pay for it because it's too expensive. No. Okay.
You have a lot to say on this, huh?
It's a very interesting topic. I love the topic because it's very important. Yeah, it's so much efforts. Now, if we look at what the Commission they have tried to do in the framework programs, is this something you have dug into at an earlier stage?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, a little. So, of course, like when you look at Horizon Europe, you can see like there's a whole pillar, right? All of pillar 3 is for innovation. European Innovation Council, these new European innovation ecosystems. And in previous programs, the EIT was, of course, the body.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have these other things that they have done, like the kicks, I don't know if you saw, but the climate kick is actually the first one that's going to be self-sufficient, I think.
That's nice.
Yeah, that was announced earlier this week, I think. So yeah, I would say, yeah, the European Commission is doing a lot, and then you have these other kind of spin-off type of ideas like the Venture EU and Invest EU, and then you go even further and you have the European Investment Bank, but we're kind of moving kind of far further and further away from Horizon Europe there.
No, but it's still tools that you should be able to use when you come out of the framework program project, right? So that's the idea with the Commission, as you will have sort of certain value chain of funding possibilities, And it's true what you say. So for these, the EITs, the KICs, and so on, these are also the whole focus on the technology platforms that they had through into FP7 to build them up. Both input to the work programs to secure that it is driven, the issues that are in the calls are driven by the industry and research, that they together sit to understand, like that it is actually the burning platforms that gets into the so that should alone, so from the starting point, making sure that they define themselves what they need funding for to move on. That's one thing. And then what you say also, that they started to EIT's kicks, but also the joint, what are they called? The
joint
bio-based circular bio-based Europe, Spire. These that they have their own place in the framework in the work programs with their own batches of calls, define them themselves within a certain area. So this they do. I've been doing a lot with these things to get the industry involved, to get the collaboration, the discussions with research and industry, to getting rid of the cleavage between them, all for impact. It's because that's the point. That is actually the point with all these things, all these measures, all these fora. It's a massive effort that is being done. If you look at a full year man hours, put that are people that are working with this based on, we want something coming out of our funding. We want a proper impact and return on investment, so to say, for all the money we spend on the funding. We want to make sure that something comes out of it.
Yeah. And I think I was at an event earlier on this week, and one of the speakers made the point that, in a way, the European Commission has to define what are the challenges that they want the researchers to take up, because otherwise, if I'm a researcher and I'm interested in X topic, I will continue, trying to look at X topic instead of Y, and Y topic might be the one that's more relevant or more important to society. But I might choose to go down this road. And and sometimes you have, very often, and again, I'm talking about the research community, but very often you have researchers coming and saying we need more basic research. And I do think there's a valid place for basic research, like, don't get me wrong, but I think there does need to be a balance between the basic research, the challenges that we want, because the challenges do kind of bring results back to the taxpayers. And the basic research is also important for maybe finding things that we never would have found otherwise. And it has its place too, but I think we also have to address the societal issues. And then the innovation pillar is just a completely different way of looking at it as well. And I think it's a really interesting and cool kind of thing. I do think it's good that the European Commission is moving kind of more towards trying to stimulate innovation and stimulating and innovation can be, within industry, like you've been talking about, but also, SMEs and smaller groups. And I think that that's really important.
They have done a lot over these, but they also done things that. But it's also, I guess, the commission is it's innovation process as a funding administrator. For instance, you had these. Just remember elements like they had some cluster. What were they called? Cluster innovation code, something like this, where clusters would work to innovation clusters. It had a specific. It was batch of calls, and it was extremely popular, but it was very, very difficult to get the funding. And the projects that actually got the funding, they were just basically. The point was that they would, through the project, they should hand out vouchers of a certain value to SMEs in their stakeholder portfolio with things that they would do, and it didn't really work that well. You had a handful of these, and it was just sort of drowned. These vouchers, it was not enough anyways, and it's. But again, they try. Then you have then you have the EIC, the SME program, and that I think it's better now. But
Much better now.
but there was a period where it was extremely difficult to get funding because, well, I know why. The reason why it was difficult to get funding is it became easier to apply for the funding. And that's also it's the Commission's eternal problem. How is it more important to make a flexible call text so you don't constrain the good idea out there, but then you will receive like tons of proposals you need to evaluate, or do you narrow in so you get less and you're like focused? Okay, we define what they need to apply for, and then we get less proposals of a certain quality. So this is, and I know it because it's kind of ground, it's baseline discussions and discourse discussions that what are we doing this for, in the program committees when I was sitting there back in 10. Are we going to, what's most important, and I think, but now it's better. I think it's easier to get, because when the EIC started, it was very difficult because they just got so many proposals. It was a 2% success rate or something like this. And how do you want to ask a small SME in your local neighborhood to? I think it's a good idea to approach this, and then they put a lot of effort and yeah.
And also, of course, like as you say, if it's a small company, generally speaking, the European Commission grant process is kind of, administratively heavy. And I remember in Horizon 2020, I think this was one of the things that SMEs were kind of saying, that it was too heavy, and so on the side of the administrative burden, and so the Commission kind of scaled it back, and I think they scaled it back further for Horizon Europe. But yeah, I remember this being like a debate at the time.
Administration, of course, is always an issue now, but now they made the lump sum, the course of lump sum approach, where you get a batch of money, you get a box of money, and then you can use it as you want, so to say. Now you have to define it, but you don't have to make a specified budget like this when you apply. You say, okay, you want to do this. Those are your partners. This is what you want to do. Those are your work packages. This is your impact and results, and so on. Okay. And make a rough budget. Okay, this is what you want to do here. Do what it. You have promised us this, so that's what we're going to expect. But we're not going to define where or how much or who is going to get what, and so on. So, and that's also easier in relation to budget. Like when they finalize, you don't have to send back wage slips accounting. Yeah. So at least, so that's also, I think, an initiative they've made to make these things easier.
Yeah, but it needs to be easier because, like, of course, a big university or a big industrial partner has a lot of resources to put towards administrative things, but a small company really doesn't, especially if they're trying to grow.
It's disastrous for them.
Yeah.
No, really.
And then for it to go nowhere, if the chances of success are very low, then
I think I always, when I was supporting SMEs with what they should do with these things, I say, look, it's actually, when you get into the principles, it's not that different from what you used to do. But you will need to invest a little bit of time understanding how it is. When you got it, it's going to be okay. But sometimes you just, what's this? Why do you have to?
I can imagine.
What I want to mention here in this section is how the Commission has sort of slowly in the work programs built in elements to force, because that was what we talked about earlier on, the lack of incentive, right? Or lack of definition, or lack of push from the funding administrators to lock the funding to post project activities. And this is what they've done now. Yeah. So that's the latest development. But over the years, for each framework program, it sort of lifted the importance of impact. So from FP7 to Horizon 2020, they lifted the focus on it. You remember a little bit more better than I. So they, oh, you mentioned it earlier, Kathy.
Oh, the exploitation plan.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. Also, you had because that was part of the SME program in FP7, but what they did in Horizon 2020 was that they started to introducing in the what is now Pillar 2, so the innovation projects, you would have to make a business plan.
Hmm.
Yeah, you have to make a market analysis. So all these things that you would do as a private company if you need to go on the market with something. What are my
Hmm.
competitors? What are the patterns? Like what are there any issues with how are we supposed to what is the market? Where are we going with it? Who are we collaborating with? Like all these things. Simple business development, yeah, a business development plan
Hmm.
for what you want to do. That changed, and then in Horizon Europe, they have the issues that you need to deal with in the impact section. It's the level of detail that you need to put has been raised from Horizon 2020 to Horizon Europe. It's yeah, so it's they keep sort of adding elements that you need to. Ah, yeah, sorry, that was what I forgot. The post project activities. So you have to make a strategy for your results after the
Hmm.
project.
Hmm.
How will this fly? You have to, so you cannot just say make a sketchy text, or you have to make a detailed plan on what's going to happen concretely with this result after the project.
Hmm.
And here what they're doing here is that they are saying, okay, this is a it's a market failure with the funding we give. They don't do it if unless we squeeze them in on it. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it
Yeah, yeah,
is.
yeah. I mean,
It's
it is. And
we
also
make
the
all this framework. We just went through it, right? The whole system that they built with technology platforms, with all the EITs, with the kicks, with the JRCs, and also all these things. And then then they don't do it anyways in the end. So okay, guys, that's it. Now we are going to 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 squeeze you here. You need to give us something more than this for the money we pay you.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're trying to get the response, but I mean, I do think it's good in a way, as you said, to have like looking at the business plan or looking at the exploitation plan, and especially if you're looking at that kind of before you even start the project, right? You're looking at that when you're making the grant, and you're kind of saying to yourself, okay, how are we going to use the results? I do think that that's a good strategy of the commission to have that at the forefront of the consortium's mind before they even start the project.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
Because I mean, immediately they kind of, I mean, ultimately you kind of have a plan, you kind of have a goal. You have like, and the goal is not just, let's do more research. The goal is like, let's have either a product or an NGO or a company or whatever at the end of it, right? So
Hmm.
I think that's good, because I do think that also, well, what it should do, I don't know whether it actually does in practice, but I think what it should do is kind of, instantly get the researcher into that mind space of, you know, how is this research going to help society? How is this research going to have an impact on the average European citizen?
Yeah,
Whether they achieve those results or not, you see as you go through the project, but at least it kind of will make people start thinking about that, because if you don't stimulate people to think that way, they won't. I mean, why would you?
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
they'll just think, okay, great funding, and then they'll go, okay, great. At the end of this funding, we'll go for more funding.
yeah. But
And I
that's
think,
the whole point.
yeah, and I think it's good also if, let's say, and I mean, consortia are huge, as we know, but if you're, let's say, a young person and you're involved in one of these projects, I think it also helps because maybe you're going to think a little bit more entrepreneurially, right? You'll kind of see, And you might also think, I mean, especially if you're a PhD student or if you're in the early kind of stages of your career, whether that's in industry or in a startup or in a research organization or whatever, it can also give you more options. You can also think, well, I can go down this path, or I can go down this path based on the results of this project. It can also open some doors, because I do think in Europe we also have this system where and it's not the same in every country, but it's just one thing that I noticed being here in Brussels, where kind of what you start out in your career in, you're kind of expected to nearly follow that line the whole way up.
Mhm.
And life is not really like that,
No.
People make different decisions, and I think we should be encouraging people to look at all the options and try to find careers that are satisfying as well. Um, and also, if we go back to the research ecosystem, I mean, you have a system where there are way more PhD researchers than can ever become tenured professors, right?
Mm.
So you really, really need those young people, and maybe not young people, but people doing their PhDs, but you really, really need them to be thinking about other career options,
Yeah.
because the chances of them continuing in academia is quite low. So, so yeah, I mean, I think it's not bad to have this kind of strategy, which makes the consortia think immediately about what's going to happen at the end, no
Yeah.
matter when the end may be.
Yeah. I think I had an old colleague, one of my first colleagues I had when I worked for the Danish Agency for Science, Technology, Innovation as a program committee in NCP. And back then, she's very clever. Back then, when she was facilitating, talking to researchers and companies, SMEs, and so on, how they should approach a proposal, she said, start with impact.
Mm-hmm.
Don't start with excellence.
Yeah.
Start with impact, because that will force you to first think about what will come out of it, and then you can start to develop your excellence and
Mm-hmm.
implementation section. Few people do that. I just recently asked her. She was a guest here, one of my first guests, and I asked her, and she said, "I'm still saying it, but they don't really listen."
Yeah.
Because it's very difficult for the users, because their motivation when they think about getting EU funding is not impact. Their motivation is to develop their research or innovation idea, to develop that, how they're going to carry out the project and how the work packages they fit together, how they are going to, that's what motivates them to do. So you're gonna take out, you're gonna shut, you're gonna blow out that light in their eyes. Turn it on later when you do.
Yeah.
But it's but that's the truth. It's yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I truly believe you're going to write a very good proposal if you go from that angle, because this is what the commission wants. Commission wants to hear about, impact, and how this is going to make the EU better for all of the citizens. So, if you have got a really strong impact action,
Maybe
I
they will,
imagine.
in the next framework program, they will shift impact to be section number one.
Maybe they should. Recommendation.
Or it being the only section.
Oh, we'll see. I think there will be uproar.
No, let's move into where the tools are moving and talking, because we want to talk about your article, right? we
Eventually.
want we want to talk about the hackathon. We want to talk about other things that I know about these things. So if we just start with your article on the hackathon, it's a brilliant idea.
Mm.
Yeah. So refresh. So we just refresh people. So if just to refresh, because you mentioned it in the beginning. So
Yeah, so my article was about EU hackathons. Specifically, it was kind of focused on this one, which was by EMODNet, the European Marine and Observational Data Network, which is like this huge, huge database of a wide, wide range of European marine data. So like data about salinity, temperature, the floor of the ocean. They have so much data. And they have these huge data which come from massive amount of projects, because I think all the EU marine-based projects are kind of highly encouraged, let's say, to upload their data to the eModNet platform.
Mm-hmm.
So they have this huge amount of data. And so they decided to organize this hackathon. And actually, this was the third edition. They had organized two before.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the first one that was online. And they decided to organize this hackathon to essentially get people to start to use the data and look at the data in different ways. And so my article was sort of about how the EU might use hackathons to generate impact from project results.
Yeah.
And so this eModNet one was not the only one in the article. I also mentioned others which were run by Eurostat. Of course, I think the most famous one the EU ran is probably the EU versus virus one, which they ran in 2020.
Yeah.
But this is kind of like these are ongoing initiatives of the European Commission. And I mean, from my personal perspective, I just think it's a really interesting way to also engage with all EU citizens, because of course this hackathon is open to everyone, no matter who you are, you can take part. Um, and eModNet actually told me about a very interesting example where they actually had a fisherman join at their hackathon. And of course, normally on the hackathon, normally the usual profile that they would get would be marine scientists and data scientists, right?
Mm-hmm.
But because of their platform, but they got this fisherman. And it was really interesting because he had taken it on himself to collect data using his fishing boat, and he could see that there was a need for data. So he had sort of collected data and he had the means to collect more data,
Mm-hmm.
but he needed scientists to help him organize the data, create a project, and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really interesting because, when you're in the EU research and policy space, I mean, normally you're talking to people who are researchers in industry, and you know you're not really, I suppose, talking to people like fishermen very often.
Yeah.
But this is an important community,
It
and
is.
these hackathons can reach these communities and also involve them in using the results of EU data. And that was something that I thought was really, really interesting and cool.
I think they should do this all the time.
I
No, but
agree.
really, no. Through the work I have now, it's non-EU proposal related work. But what we are part of an EU funded project related to attracting international labor,
Mm,
recruiting international labor to Denmark, and part of that as a tool to make the connection stronger between local companies and candidate students coming out of university is to make company challenges. Yeah.
okay.
So and you can it's like the approach of saying, look, we have a problem. Look at it in a weekend or 5 days. You get a week or 5 days. Look at it and say, how would you attack this issue? How would you deal with this issue? And to see if you can collaborate further on. And this is a little bit the same thing. Now just here you have a result. How can you take that result and use it in a specific way? It's extremely tangible. It's saying, look, there's so much information coming out of these research and innovation projects. It's immense of information that has been gathered over the years within all socioeconomic areas. Everything. Yeah. It's such a huge amount of information that just, and some of it is being used. We are not talking to you guys out there, but there's a lot of information that is not being used. Get it out to work. Get it out to work. You have people probably looking after this information right now, and it is there, but they don't know that it's there because it's not accessible, or it's weird to get, or you don't know which channels you need to get on. Make the community, socioeconomic communities, industry areas, whatever, aware of the fact that you have information lying there, and we need to get this out and work.
I mean, now we have just so much data, right? Because every project generates so much data. And like you're saying, a lot of the time it just sits there.
Yeah.
So, and even like, one of eMudNet's missions is to like, make this data available to researchers that they can have access to it open. And of course, this is important, but I do think that like these dedicated events also where you come together, you try to solve a problem, you bring together people from all walks of life, and I think it sort of focuses you in a way because of course these hackathons are like what, 2 days?
Yeah.
And I think the time pressure is also something that you know makes you makes you kind of focus on the task and try to get to the end of it, and
Yeah.
yeah,
But
rather than
that,
spacing it out.
but I think if we can agree that there's also a facilitating issue here, because you have the Commission has throughout Horizon 2020 and it's continued in Horizon Europe this open innovation, right?
Hmm.
Open data.
Yeah.
All projects have to be, before you could choose to take it, now you have to take it. Yeah.
Mm.
It's open source, so information. So that information is there from all projects,
Hmm.
and the Commission has the power to start releasing that in these kind of ways and being utilize them. Now they use this within marine, but they could, in principle, go through a lot of areas and say, look, let's take this data, and they see what's being used and what's not.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, this is not being used. We need that to be used. We need to see if at least, and then it's a cheap way also to do it.
Oh yeah,
Even
it
if
is.
even if it's only a week. This
Mm.
is 2 days, but if you say give them 2 weeks, yeah, 14 days here. See how you would attack this, how you can use it, how it can be used for nuclear science, whatever. You know, it's in my view should be done. What we talked about also in the AI episode was actually related to this, because we talked about the results and how, because now it's blocked. It's blocked for a certain amount of years. Years, we're talking 4 or 5 years. That that the project partners has the owner right over this, and if they don't use it, then it's being released. But as one of my guests said, no, if you don't want to use this, it's not going to sit there for 5 years. This is taxpayers' money being spent on you developing this.
Hmm.
A lot of
Hmm.
people made proposals and efforts to do this. You
Hmm.
got the funding, you develop this, so it's not going to sit there for 5 years if you don't want to use it. They should. He's, well, of course, a little bit putting it on the spot. 2 months or whatever. But anyway, shorten it and say, look, you need to make a plan, and if you do not follow that plan that you've given us, then it's going to be released.
Hmm.
If it's
Yeah,
six,
see
saying
the
so,
point.
you need to, after project end date, you have maximum a year to
Hmm.
have something being rolled out related, and if you don't, well,
Yeah.
sorry, but it's
Yeah, it's like you're saying, it's publicly funded. It's for the good of the public. The data should be made public so that someone else can use it if you're not going to, you know?
yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. How much do you know of the Horizon Results Booster?
I know a good bit. Yeah, we can talk about it if that's what you're asking me.
Nah, we just touch it a little bit, because it's also one of the things that they did right back
Mm.
in the last year of Horizon 2020. They made a tender, the Commission, on making an initiative to boost results from Horizon funded project.
Hmm.
So make an initiative where you had organizations that would win the tender, that would sit and then take project by project, so to say. You could apply for the results boost. So you would have to go in to the results booster as if you have finished your funded project, and then you would get a strategy outline on how you could move on with that.
Hmm.
Right, that's sort of the shortly. Or is there any else other things in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. They have like three different main services that you can go for. So one is like, as you say, kind of going through the plan, the exploitation, and I think also the dissemination plan. Another one is like your go-to-market strategy if you want to commercialize. And then there is a third one, which is okay, it escapes me now, but there is a third service that they provide as well. And I think this is a really great initiative. But the thing is, I don't think that a lot of projects know that it exists
No.
because it's completely free for them to use if you have like Horizon funding.
Yeah.
You have to apply for services. I'm not saying that like, everybody who wants it can't get it, but um, yeah, if you need help with your dissemination and your exploitation strategy, the Commission has funded this service that you can avail of, and they have like experts from innovation experts, IP experts.
Yeah.
Um,
As I
mm,
mentioned to you pre-recording, I was working in the company that P&O won that together with Meta Group.
mhm.
So we were sitting,
Yeah,
us consultants in P&O, we were getting these things in. We could decide each consultant if we wanted to take them in, but we were encouraged by our managers to take them in. I didn't because I had too much else to do. But the point is, yes, it is. So it's actual, it's research consultants that sit with it, and we would then get from the tender an hourly rate for the things that we would be doing for.
mhm, mhm,
So no one would have money out of their pockets; it would be covered by the tender,
mhm.
money set aside for it. What I'm thinking, Catherine, it would actually be a podcast episode if you somehow could could get someone
Yeah,
from Mesa Group into the virtual podcast studio to
I
have a
would
talk
say
about this.
happily. Yeah, I can definitely ask. Yeah, and see.
We should
But
do that.
I think I could ask Alessia, and I think she's the lead on HRB. So I will ask her and see what she says. But there,
Definitely, because they have been sitting and they were the lead on the tender, so she would probably have much more detailed information than us on the
definitely.
history and
Oh yeah, they are the
uh,
real experts.
based on data, not assumptions of knowledge, so to say, from here and there.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so it's a good initiative and it's still running. I don't remember just because there was a time limit on that when it
I
would
think it was a
finish.
10-year, was it? It was quite a long one, but from memory. But I could be wrong.
I don't remember. No, we can talk with her about that.
Yeah.
So it's still running. I will put it in the episode notes for everybody out there. Link to that, so
Hmm.
anyone who's interested or forwarding it to other contacts. No, Catherine,
Yeah, we're
we
hitting
should
the end.
soon wrap this episode up. The grand. Normally, I always have the segment, the toughest challenge.
Yeah, so if we're looking at hackathons, I mean, I think from talking to the hackathons that I talked to, I think the one weakness that I see there is what happens at the end. Um, so let's say some of the hackathons are like, oh, we'll introduce you to a network, but is that the relevant network? I think is the question, because for example, if you're going to introduce people to the winners of the hackathon to other researchers or NGOs or other organizations that are active in the field, I mean, that's great from an interest perspective, but if you really want people to, I don't know, make companies, let's say, or um, then they have to be given access to essentially the investment community. And that's something that I don't always see at the end of these hackathons. Like, are they actually engaged with people who can fund them to make the project go further? And when I talk about funding in this sense, I'm really thinking more about equity, and I'm thinking more about angel investment, and I'm thinking more about that kind of line of things.
Uh,
That's one of the weaknesses that I saw. But like, and I think that's an easy thing to solve, actually. You just have to make sure that you have a certain amount of those individuals who are that you approach early on and that you get them interested in the hackathon and interested in maybe being mentors throughout the hackathon. And then at the end, if they're interested, you know, they have a community or they have an opportunity to pitch to investors or something like this. That's the one thing I would see.
Yeah, it's correct. Now, so if you do something like this, there should be something that leads them on. Yeah.
Yeah,
To
exactly.
because it's everybody needs, you need some sort of you need some finances to realize things. You're right.
And it's sort of going back to the same problem that we highlighted earlier. You know, I mean, if you have like, so in this case, an event, a hackathon, but if you don't have anything, if you don't have a kind of support structure set up to
Yeah,
help
yeah.
get the impact from that,
Yeah.
then what's the point? Then, okay, yay, it's a great event and we have great ideas about what to do with our research, but we don't actually have a use again, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Actually, we didn't cover. I put it as a red mark in the rundown, but I remember that there have been, at least in Horizon 2020, I don't know, in Horizon Europe, venture capital related calls.
Yeah.
Building networks of business angels, stuff like this, but I don't remember in detail. That's of course, excuse me, dear listeners, on my desktop issues, because it's a huge landscape to go through.
Well,
But they did try to do something, the commission, on, but that's not, of course, related to the hackathons we just talked about. So I agree, in this kind of setup, it's not enough to make a hackathon. You need to, if you mean it seriously, then you make that, and then you make a structure where it's possible for them, where you have different roads they can take if they want to move on, to realize that activity. So yeah, I agree. It's important.
yeah. Yeah.
That was nice. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah,
Great.
no worries. I mean, yeah, sorry, go on.
No, we're still recording. So no, thank you so much for coming by, Catherine. I'm just going to shut the program down, so to say, before we say goodbye to the listeners. So, dear listeners, thanks for listening to the end. Hope you find this talk interesting. I will continue with the nose in the track. Catherine, I will ask you to try to see if we can do something with the meta group people that you know from your earlier position, because this is very important things to dig into in relation to the funding area. As you all know, this initiative keeps growing. I keep pushing on for content in different directions. And probably some of you think, oh, wait a minute, now I was getting used to getting Horizon Europe content, and now I'm getting Erasmus Plus content. But that's how it is. It's supposed to be different streams of interesting information that people from all corners of the EU funding community can dig into and get information that they can use in the daily life they have with their work on these things. So don't worry, there's always going to come something back related to your specific funding interests, so don't worry about that. You can also scroll through my portfolio in my website, thegrant.eu. It starts to be a lot, reaching towards 60 episodes now. So do that. Yeah, I keep saying I have the hub, but yeah, I have a resources site. You can check that out. Also, that I always forget to mention it, but by all means, if you're not connected with me on LinkedIn, connect with me, because this is my key source this is where I communicate with my network. This is also where I have a specific LinkedIn group for the granters, as I call it, my listeners. So by all means, connect with me in there, because that's where a lot of the action happens. Also in my daily comments with the things I share and so on. So that's really important that you go in and do that. What else do I always forget? Yeah, connect exactly to that LinkedIn group. I try to kick that LinkedIn group over the shin bone, but it's very difficult in LinkedIn to get people to comment on anything. But it is supposed to be a forum where you can exchange what's going on in my in the podcast episodes, but also to suggest guests or ask questions to the guests that I've had in the shows and so on. So, and finally, as I always mention, I need you to sign up to my podcast. I need you to submit to subscribe to the email list, because as a podcast startup, that is the best way to grow. So please subscribe to that if you have any sympathy with what I do. No, that was a long plane landing there, Kathy. Oh, you know what? As a podcaster like this, you learn all the time, and you know, like I've paved as I go, so I just try my best. I hope you enjoyed being a guest on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I mean, it's kind of interesting to talk about this topic, which is so niche and so nerdy in a way. But I mean, it's kind of cool because obviously I can't really talk about this with, my boyfriend or a lot of my friends. So it was nice to kind of have a chat.
You know what? That's because people within this community, they can suck up a lot of geeky, nerdy stuff on this. It's a baseline. When I was doing my desktop research and when I carved out the concept of the podcast, you can listen out there now. You get my, I'm very transparent on how I did this. I know that people, they just, they can sit and look at a 3-hour webinar from the commission and they still have questions. They still have things they want to discuss. It's a community that's it's craving information about what's going on. So that's just why I said when I started this, I'm not going to stop a good discussion. It's the whole point that here is a medium. I will create a medium where there is the time to dig into things and talk them through. If there's an interesting thing to discuss, we'll talk it through and we'll have that nice talk. That's it's one of the baseline discourses of what I'm doing here. So thanks for that comment. I appreciate it a lot. Catherine, again, thanks for coming by, and let's say goodbye to the listeners. Bye.
Bye.